Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle is an area of water that runs from Hempstead, Florida, to Bermuda Island, over to Puerto Rico, and then back home to Hempstead. Although it looks like a three-sided area, the boundaries are not all that straight. It contains about 1,510,000 square miles of the Atlantic Ocean. The Sargasso Sea is butted up against the eastern arm of the triangle, and in many places the two bodies of water share a lot of space. Back in August 19th, 2017, I did a show on the Sargasso Sea. The sea is a region of the North Atlantic Ocean, bounded by four currents, forming what's called an ocean gyre. Kind of a rotating mass of water pushing everything in towards the center. The movement of the water works like a very slow whirlpool. Unlike all other regions called seas, it has no land boundaries. It is distinguished from other parts of the Atlantic Ocean by its characteristic brown sargassum seaweed and often very calm blue water. The sea is bounded on the west by the Gulf Stream, on the north by the North Atlantic Current. The east boundary is the Canary Current, and on the south you have the North Atlantic Equatorial Current. All of these currents are causing a clockwise circulating system of ocean, termed the North Atlantic Gyre. All the current deposits of marine plants and refuse they carry in the sea, yet the ocean water in the Sargasso Sea is distinctive for its deep blue color and exceptional clarity, with underwater visibility of up to 200 feet. It is also a body of water that has captured the public imagination, and so it's seen in a wide variety of literature and artistic works, and in popular culture. And just to make things a bit weirder, the water on one side is rough, churning constantly as they crash about in their forward movement. As you come to the edge of the Sargasso Sea, the water suddenly becomes calm. It's kind of what you see as you pass through the eye wall of a hurricane. You go from a storm-filled sea to a calm area known as the eye of the hurricane. Now, this is nothing as violent as a hurricane, but that was the best example I could come up with. Outside the Sargasso Sea, the water is spinning like mad as compared to the water inside that is stationary and calm. It's also a deep blue color. If you can get the seaweed out of the way, the visibility is good, and the water is clear and calm. As the oceans spin around this body of water in a clockwise direction, it pushes everything floating into the center of the calm water. Things like floating trash, tossed from passing ships to derelict ships and boats. There's very little wind here that can play havoc on a sailing vessel. As the sailing vessel approaches the Sargasso Sea, it almost looks as if they're approaching land. The seaweed floating on the surface looks solid. But back when all ships were at the mercy of the wind, sailing ships would find this area difficult, if not downright impossible, to maneuver. The forward motion would be brought to a crawl as the wind played out, and then the seaweed would pile up, causing the ship to come to a complete standstill. Once the forward motion was gone, rowboats would be lowered into the hopes of being able to pull the ship forward. Well, the rowboats were in a bad situation as well due to all that seaweed, making rowing very difficult. The Portuguese sailors first discovered the Sargasso Sea with its mat of seaweed in the early 15th century. The thick layer of seaweed combined with the lack of wind soon became a problem for these sailors. They charted the location on maps so future vessels would be able to maneuver around with little risk as possible. Christopher Columbus sailed past this bizarre sea in 1492. He thought he'd reached land until they were right on top of the weeds and could see what it actually was. He was fortunate he didn't try sailing straight through the area, or the Americas might not have been found, at least not by the Europeans. Most people are under the impression the Sargasso Sea was there long before the Bermuda Triangle came into being. The triangle was there as long as anyone can remember. The Sargasso Sea has been there just as long. The two have probably been here as long as the planet that we call home. No one had managed to give the place a name until the 60s, when the name Bermuda Triangle, or Devil's Triangle, came into being. The ships vanishing into the triangle were just gone, whereas ships becoming stranded in the Sargasso Sea were still there, for anybody passing by to see. The two bizarre areas of mystery are overlapping, so ships disappearing in either one would be attributed to both. On occasion, a ship, having its crew snatched from its decks as it passed through the Bermuda Triangle, could then have drifted into the seaweed of the Sargasso and become trapped. Nobody ever thought to drag a camera out to the edge of the sea and capture photographs of the unearthly scenery. Today there are plenty of photos of the weeds, but none of the ships are visible. In 1887, Commander Sigsbee of the U.S. Navy began a survey of the Sargasso Sea. He was documenting the ships trapped in the weeds as a navigational aid for the United States. With only eyes as a means of avoiding a collision at night, the survey was to be plotted on nautical maps to help ships avoid running into any of these floating wrecks. For reasons of his own, no photographs were ever taken, or at least none that we know of. Maybe in some dark government archive is a pile of old black and white photos that none of us are allowed to look at. The survey took 7 years. During that time, Commander Sigsbee documented 1,628 shipwrecks that were visible inside the weeds of the sea. The steps were taken to determine the origins of these vessels. 160 wrecks were found to be United States register. 134 ships were listed as being out of Britain. There were French, Norwegian, Swedish, even Russian ships mixed in with the floating graveyard. Since the Sargasso Sea wasn't stationary, these wrecks would move along with the seaweed. They would slowly drift in the same counterclock direction. The same clockwise direction. This movement was taken into consideration when plotting their locations. Some ships managed to stay afloat for years and circled the entire sea several times. As for the triangle, the USS Cyclops, AC-4, was one of the first ships to go missing that was reported and investigated fully. Being a U.S. Navy ship, the disappearance was not taken lightly. The Cyclops was a collier, which means it was used to carry coal and supply warships. In the age of steam power, a ship could only travel as far as its coal supply would take it. By having specially designed ships whose sole function was to carry coal, the fleet could sail as far as it was needed. The ship had a very distinct profile. It had twin smokestacks, but they were set side by side instead of one in front of the other. The deck was lined with huge steel superstructure to handle the loading and unloading of coal. The bridge was set up off the deck on 4 steel support pillars. There was a foul weather bridge inside, and a fair weather bridge that was above and open to the sky. If you spotted the Cyclops on the horizon, you'd know exactly what you were looking at. The Cyclops was also fitted to handle passengers. It had staterooms to accommodate 300 passengers. The ship put to sea from Rio de Janeiro on February 16, 1918, with 306 crew and passengers on board. They sailed to Salvador on February 20th. 2 days later, she departed for Baltimore, Maryland. The ship was designed and used to transport coal, but on this trip north, the Cyclops was carrying manganese ore. The captain had submitted a report saying that the starboard engine had a cracked cylinder and was not in operation. Having 2 engines, this did not seem to be much of a problem. The commanding officer was Captain Worley. He had been born Johann Friedrich Wickmann in Hanover, Germany, on December 11, 1865. The captain had entered the United States by jumping ship in San Francisco in 1878. A ship's crew was usually made up of men from all over the world. They could enter any country with their passport, but they were confined to the port area. If a crewman were to simply wander away from the designated port area, he was considered to have jumped ship. It wasn't as if he jumped over the rail and swam ashore. By 1898, Worley had changed his name, and he'd opened a saloon in San Francisco's Barbary Coast. During this time, he managed to qualify for a position of ship's master and had commanded several civilian merchant ships. Captain Worley carried cargo from San Francisco to the Far East and back. There is some speculation that he may have smuggled illegal drugs on some of his voyages. Opium was a common illicit cargo. The captain had a reputation for mistreating his crew. He would yell and swear at them, and one time he chased a junior officer around with a pistol. The former crewman said the captain was seen walking the decks, sometimes dressed in just his underwear. Well, his underwear and his hat. Worley was commissioned as a lieutenant commander in the Navy Auxiliary Reserve on February 21st, 1917. World War I was still raging in 1918, and the cargo of manganese was a vital war element used in the production of stainless steel and batteries. By March 14th, when the Cyclops was past due to arrive in port, a search was begun to try to locate the missing vessel. When no trace of the Cyclops was found, the search was intensified. Any ships passing through the area where the Cyclops was last reported were advised to look for lifeboats or debris. After weeks of scouring the sea around Bermuda, the Navy decided the Cyclops had either been torpedoed by a U-boat or captured by a German merchant raider. The Germans used ships that looked just like any merchant vessel from a friendly or neutral country. They would capture cargo ships and send the spoils back to Germany to help with the war effort. The Atlantis was one of the most famous of these raiders. At the end of the war, the Germans had no record of ever sinking any ship that looked like the Cyclops, nor had they ever captured one. The USS Proteus, AC-9, was also a collier built for the U.S. Navy. It was a sister ship to the Cyclops, built using the same blueprint. 1941, the Proteus was sold to the Canadian Merchant Navy. It was used to run cargo up and down the eastern coast of the Americas. November 1941, the ship was reported as being overdue at its destination. Once more, the Coast Guard went out looking for the ship or any of its lifeboats. They never found any debris that could be associated with the missing ship. Its last known position was in the Bermuda Triangle. All 58 crew members were never seen again. The USS Norreus, AC-10, was the third sister ship, also built using the Cyclops blueprints. After delivering coal to the U.S. Navy, it was sold to an aluminum company in Canada in February 1941. On December 10, 1941, the Nereus departed St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands en route to Canada. It sailed into the Bermuda Triangle and vanished, along with its fellow colliers. All three ships vanished without so much as a stick of wood floating on the surface. How strange is it that all three ships managed to sail the length and the width of the Atlantic Ocean without a hitch, only to vanish in the same general area? One disappearance just about everybody has heard of is Flight 19. 5 Avenger bombers were sent out from Fort Lauderdale Navy Station for a routine practice run. The flight took off on December 5, 1945. The instructor was Lieutenant Taylor. He had over 2,500 flight hours, 616 of which were in Avenger bombers. Each plane had a crew of 3, but one of the flight crew was absent. All of the flight crews had spent many hours flying in similar aircraft to the Avenger bomber, and now they were just kind of getting polished up. During the pre-flight inspection, it was found that none of the planes were equipped with clocks. All the timepieces had been pulled. Well, this wasn't really all that strange. In tank gunnery class, we would often have to shoot in less than optimal conditions. We might be told we can't use the IR sights, or we had to use the manual fire control. Sometimes we had to use different sights, so we would know how to use them if it ever came up that we had to deal with such a situation. That was all part of training. Flight 19 took off and headed out to practice firing torpedoes at the Hen and Chickens Shoals. This shoal was a shallow spot marked with a triangular tower with a light that would aid ships to avoid running aground. Each crew took turns flying into combat attitude and dropping their practice rounds on the marker. There were a number of small atolls around the marker. After dropping their torpedoes, the flight turned and flew north. They passed over the Grand Bahamas Island and continued for a few miles. The last leg was to turn and fly back to Fort Lauderdale. As Flight 19 was en route back to base, Lieutenant Taylor announced his compass had stopped working. This shouldn't have been a problem because each Avenger bomber was equipped with 2 compasses. The pilot had his, as well as the radio operator, a bombardier, who also did navigation. When Lieutenant Taylor said his compass was out, it was soon learned that all 10 compasses had stopped working. What are the odds of this happening, and all at the same time? A cloud cover had moved in, and the sun was just barely a bright spot in the sky. Being late in the afternoon, the flight should have simply flown towards the brightest part of the sky. They would have found their way home. Lieutenant Taylor announced he was lost, and he could not identify any of the small islands they had passed over. He became confused. He had the planes turn and continue out to sea. You might ask why all the other pilots followed him. This was what you did. If the commander said do this, you did it. Back on land, the control tower tried to contact Flight 19 and give them a heading. The radio operator could hear the planes talking back and forth, but the planes didn't seem able to hear the ground-based radio. By this time, the Avenger bombers were running low on fuel. Lieutenant Taylor said they would stick together and they would try to ditch as close by to each other so they would lessen the chances of being lost at sea. Now each plane was equipped with a small life raft, just big enough for 3 men to squeeze into. Each member of the crew wore an inflatable life vest, and there was a lot of equipment that would float in the plane if it were to go down. A search and rescue was called out, and all the ships in the area converged on the last known location of Flight 19. 2 PBM Mariner float planes were sent out to look for the crews. A PBM looked like a giant flying boat. They were designed to take off and land on the water. Each PBM was crewed by 13 men. The flying boats would fly in a grid pattern, looking for any signs of the missing men. By nightfall, the search was called off due to darkness. They would resume again once the sun was back up. Searching at night was just a non-starter. Soon, the ground crews found that one of the rescue planes was overdue. If for whatever reason a flying boat had engine trouble or should run out of fuel, it could simply set down on the water. After all, they were built to float. The next morning, a search was started, now looking for not only Flight 19, but now they're looking for the PBM Mariner as well. Nothing was ever found of the 6 planes. 24 crewmen in Flight 19 and 13 men on the PBM, there should have been something. A body, a piece of wood. The seats from the planes floated, but nothing was found during the exhaustive search. The Navy decided Lieutenant Taylor had gotten confused and led his training flight out east from where he should have been. A man with over 2,500 flight hours, many of these during combat missions, got confused during a training mission. I know we can all make mistakes, but there is a story of one of the folks at Fort Lauderdale hearing Lieutenant Taylor say, "We can't tell which way is west. Nothing is working properly. It's nuts. We can't be sure of any directions. Even the sea looks funny." Then he was heard to say, "Don't come after me. They look like they're from outer space. Don't come after me." There were 204 aircraft launched from land bases, 70 aircraft from the aircraft carrier Solomons, 4 destroyers, 18 Coast Guard patrol boats, hundreds of private aircraft and yachts and boats of all sorts. They searched the area for days on end. Nothing was found. During the second day of the search, December 6th, a Navy privateer, it's a one-tail version of the Army's B-24, along with its 11-man crew, also disappeared without a trace. Now we have a total of 7 planes and 48 men, all vanished in 2 days, without so much as a life vest ever being found. July 2nd, 1989, the Chicago Tribune announced Flight 19 had been found in the Florida Everglades. A brush fire had been raging through the swamp, and as the firefighting aircraft passed over the burned foliage to drop water on the fire, a pilot spotted what looked like a crashed Avenger bomber in the burned-out area. Once the flames were out, a helicopter was sent to the scene of the crash to investigate whether or not this was one of the missing planes from 1945. Once on the ground near the Avenger, the investigators could find no matching serial numbers that would correspond with Flight 19. A search of the area found no crewmen's remains from the wreck. The Navy had no record of a training flight disappearing in this area. There were no records of crews crashing there and being picked up. This only added to the mystery surrounding Flight 19, since a plane was found that was definitely a Navy bomber, but there was no record of it ever going missing. But it gets stranger than this. In 1991, a treasure hunting expedition led by Graham Hawkes announced that the wreckage of 5 Avengers had been discovered off the coast of Florida. Everybody just assumed they had found the missing Flight 19 planes. I remember seeing a few reports saying that Flight 19 had been found and there was nothing weird going on. In 2004, Hawks returned with a small submersible with the intentions of identifying one, if not all 5 of the planes, using the Bureau number. This number was etched into the metal of the plane. They spotted the numbers and they wrote them down, only to discover none of the Bureau numbers belonged to Flight 19. The planes were all from other flights that had crashed on different dates, some as far back as 2 years before Flight 19 went missing. Despite the odds of it ever happening, these were a random collection of 5 crashed Avenger bombers that came to rest in the same place, just 12 miles from Fort Lauderdale. March 2012, a bid to make the whole Bermuda Triangle Flight 19 mystery go away, Hawks stated that he thought he had indeed found Flight 19, and thus the whole case was closed. This was pushed along by the Pentagon, who were in a hurry to dismiss the entire event. I can understand the government not wanting people to think there were things going on that were beyond those in power's ability to control, but this just smells of a cover-up. Had Flight 19 crashed so close to Fort Lauderdale, shouldn't the rescue parties have found something either floating on the waves or washed up on the beach somewhere? It seems every time somebody comes along claiming to have solved the Flight 19 mystery, it always turns out to be some other mystery that also remains unsolved. And with that, I am going to take a brief pause and play a couple commercials. We'll be right back after this, so don't go away. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Are you taking care of your skin, or are you going to wait and see how time treats you? Take care today by contacting Lourdes James, Independent Beauty Consultant, at 723 3019. Don't let time get the best of you. Coffee makes the world go round, and around here we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. If you're not looking for coffee, try their tea. It's the best in town. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. If you need to squint and hold things out at arm's length to see them, maybe you should get your eyes checked. Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, is right across from the Embassy Suites. Now stop squinting and start seeing. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. July 3rd, 1947, a C-54 Skymaster disappeared while traveling through the Bermuda Triangle. Some folks have come to the conclusion that the plane simply ran afoul of a huge storm that caused it to crash. The trouble with this theory is, the storm was nowhere near the planned flight path of the C-54. The C-54 was a military version of the aircraft Douglas DC-4 and was capable of carrying 85 passengers and 4 crewmen. On the day of the flight, there were 5 crew members. Major Ward was the pilot. He was very familiar with the plane, and he had many hours of flight time. 1 month previous to the flight, the general instructions came out telling all air crews to avoid thunderstorms and any severe weather that they encountered. After leaving Bermuda en route to Morrison Field, Florida, the C-54 took a deviation from its listed course. The plane began flying south instead of flying west-southwest. After flying south for a few minutes, the plane turned and it flew north for a while, about a half hour. It finally turned west and proceeded to fly directly towards a huge thunderstorm. The pilot, the co-pilot, the navigator, and the radio operator all sat in the cockpit and watched as a huge black storm grew closer and closer without ever taking any kind of evasive action. Once the plane was in the heart of the storm, the radio operator sent out an SOS. Oh, by the way, the Titanic was not the first ship to use the distress signal SOS. July 1st, 1908, the German government put the SOS into use. The letters did not stand for Save Our Ship. The Germans wouldn't have used English meaning for one of their phrases. The 3 letters were chosen because they were easy to transmit using Morse code. The first ship to send out an SOS distress call was the Cunard liner RMS Slavonia on June 10th, 1909. The Titanic didn't use the call until April 15th, 1912. The White Star Line was always trying to one-up the Cunard line. They hammered the idea that the Titanic was the first one to use the SOS call. The other commonly used distress call is Mayday. This has nothing to do with a day in May. It is actually an anglicized term from the French m'aides or m'aider, which means help me. The investigation board looking into the disappearance of the plane at Morrison Field, Florida, tried to figure out why the aircraft had made so many bizarre course changes. They checked the credentials of the navigator. Although he had been a last-minute substitute for the regular navigator, he held a Class II navigator certification, so he knew what he was doing. Major Ward was in charge. He had flown enough hours to know the right compass heading in order to fly to Florida from Bermuda. Even though the plane started flying south after their departure, he should have simply overridden the course. It is a mystery how both of them could have made such a blatant mistake. And this says nothing about the entire crew ignoring their instructions to avoid any dangerous storms. The investigators at Morrison Field had this to say about the crash. After considering all available facts and existing weather conditions, it is the opinion of the Accident Investigation Board at Morrison Field, Florida, that the aircraft encountered violent turbulence and the pilot lost control of the aircraft. It is possible that structural failure was a factor prior to contact with the ocean. No evidence of a fire exists. They also said there was no evidence of a ditching attempt, and the debris found indicates that the crew compartment was torn apart on contact with the ocean. The last plotted position of the aircraft and the corresponding position of the frontal zone substantiates the weather assumption. Contributing factors to this accident were possible navigational error, allowing the aircraft to drift north of the course to the frontal zone, and pilot error in that no apparent effort was made to circumnavigate the frontal weather. So, a well-seasoned pilot and a well-trained navigator, along with the rest of the flight crew, just wandered around the Atlantic Ocean until they spotted a thunderstorm and then flew right into it. This sounds way too crazy. There has to be something else that caused this unexplained crash. January 30th, 1948. The Star Tiger, a Tudor aircraft, was flying from the Azores, which is a group of islands off the coast of Portugal, en route to Bermuda. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the passengers were mostly asleep in this cross-ocean flight. Around 3:15, the radio operator contacted Bermuda Airfield to ask for a location fix. Their location was given as being 2 hours from Bermuda. They should be on the ground by 5 a.m. At 4:45, the Bermuda Tower tried to raise the Star Tiger to confirm their arrival time. The plane didn't respond, but in those days radio traffic was not the best, so the radio operator waited until 5 to try again. Still no answer. After the third attempt at 5:10, an emergency was declared and search planes were sent out. When no immediate answers were found, 26 planes were launched in an attempt to find the missing plane along with its 30 passengers and crew. As ships passing through the area were diverted to look for any lifeboats or wreckage. Soon, the rescue became a recovery operation. They searched as far as it was conceivable for the plane to have been, but found no clues as to what had happened to the plane. After 5 days, the search was called off. The British Aviation Ministry grounded the other 2 Tudor aircraft owned by the BSAA airline. Once a thorough check of these planes, they were released for cargo flights only. The British Air Ministry began an investigation to try to find out what had become of the Star Tiger. After the 11-day investigation, the ministry came back with a whole host of things that didn't happen, but they had no answers as to what actually did. They said, In closing this report, it may truly be said that no more baffling problem has ever been presented for investigation. In the complete absence of any reliable evidence as to either the nature or the cause of the accident, the Star Tiger, the court has not been able to do more than suggest possible, none of which reached the level even of probable. Into all activities which involve the cooperation of man and machine, two elements enter of a very diverse character. There is an incalculable element of the human equation dependent upon imperfectly known factors, and there's the mechanical element subject to quite different laws. A breakdown may occur in either separately or both in conjunction, or some external cause may overwhelm both man and machine. What happened in this case will never be known, and the fate of the Star Tiger must remain an unsolved mystery. It sounds like a whole bunch of government wordage trying to say that it's a mystery and they don't know what happened. The Douglas Dakota is considered the most reliable aircraft ever built. More than 10,000 were built and hundreds are still flying today. World War II and Korea, the C-47 was a mainstay of aviation. This was the military version of the DC-3, which was a cargo plane as well as used for transporting airborne troops. They flew over Normandy on D-Day, dropping hundreds of men behind enemy lines. After the war came to an end and Russia began causing trouble, the C-47 was used to supply Berlin during the Cold War airlift. To say these aircraft were reliable is a diminutive statement. Now, planes do crash, and the DC-3 or the C-47 had its share. But to go missing is rare. 3 of these airlines are known to have vanished in the Bermuda Triangle. All of them vanished within a 50-mile radius of the same location, right in around the Keys. The first DC-3 to go missing was NC-16002, which was an airplane flying for airborne transport out of Miami. December 28, 1948, with 31 passengers and crew, the plane took off from San Juan International Airport in Puerto Rico at 10 p.m. en route to Miami, Florida. The skies were clear and the wind was blowing out of the northwest. Around 11:20 p.m., air traffic control at Miami heard a routine transmission. The pilot, Bob Lindquist, stated they were at 8,300 feet and their ETA to Miami was 4 in the morning. The odd thing here was the radio control in San Juan, which was only an hour flying time away, didn't hear any of the radio traffic. Lindquist said the plane was about 700 miles away from Miami. At about 3:30 a.m., the pilot radioed he was 50 miles south and he was beginning his approach to Miami. Air traffic control waited for the next transmission. After 30 minutes, they tried raising the DC-3 on the air, but the radio was silent. When nobody could reach the plane by radio, a search was sent out to find the missing aircraft. The searchers scanned the ocean between Miami and San Juan. When no plane or debris could be found, they extended the search to the east and the west, thinking maybe the plane was blown off course. Nothing was ever found of the plane or its passengers and crew. The other 2 DC-3s vanished in just about the exact same conditions. Still, nothing but a giant mystery. Now, I came across a report, Flight 441, which was an air carrier that belonged to the U.S. Navy. The civilian version of the aircraft is known as the Super Constellation. The military version was called the Romeo 7 Victor 1. This plane was called one of the best aircraft on the planet, able to fly from one side of the Atlantic to the other in just 8 hours. It was also one of the safest airplanes at the time. October 30th, 1954, Flight 41 took off from Patuxent River Naval Air Station, bound for La Hare in the Azores. There were 42 passengers on board. It was a group of Navy officers and their families who were being transported overseas. The disappearance was listed as being in the Triangle. However, Patuxent Air Station is in Maryland. The Azores are straight east from Maryland. If Flight 441 were en route to the Azores, the Bermuda Triangle would be over 1,000 miles due south of their best course. Too many times I've come across stories associated with the Bermuda Triangle that were nowhere near. For example, the Mary Celeste. Everybody's heard of the ghost ship found adrift without a passenger or crew on December 5th, 1872. Once more, the story has been placed in the Bermuda Triangle. The ship had set out from New York en route to Genoa, Italy. This route would never bring the ship anywhere near the Triangle. It is quite a mystery as to what happened to the ship, but it does not belong in the Bermuda Triangle. Just maybe folks are getting the Mary Celeste confused with another ship. Back in the early days of ocean travel, up until recent times, there have been cases where ships that have vanished or gone missing have later been found adrift. Everything from small boats to large fishing vessels. In 1840, a merchant vessel named the Rosalie was en route from Hamburg, Germany to Havana, Cuba. The route of travel took the ship right through the Bermuda Triangle. The Rosalie was a cargo ship, 222 feet long. It probably displaced somewhere around 2,000 tons. It was built in 1838, had a full crew and several passengers, and it was in good repair. The ship never reached Havana. The Ellen Austin was an American schooner. It was a large multi-masted ship, displacing over 1,800 tons, and it was 210 feet long. The ship had been built way back in 1824 in Maine. She used to make runs between London and New York. By 1840, as she was traveling through the Bermuda Triangle, when the lookout spotted a ship under full sail, slowly moving in a converging course. The Ellen Austin soon grew close enough to hail the other ship. The captain tried to contact anybody on board this other vessel, but nobody appeared on deck. This was very unusual in those days. Someone was always on watch. Then there was the helmsman. No one was at the wheel to keep the ship on course. It was decided to board the other vessel and see what was amiss. Perhaps the crew had become incapacitated by food poisoning. Not that uncommon in those days, and there was always the possibility that the ship had been abandoned, in which case it would be open for salvage. A boarding party was sent over to the derelict ship, which turned out to be the Rosalie. The boarding crew was made up of typical sailors. Back then, even today, the sailors are somewhat superstitious. Abandoned ships were always a thing to be approached with caution. Once on board the Rosalie, they searched the entire ship, but found no one. There was no sign of any damage, and there was no reason for the crew to have abandoned ship. The ship's hold was filled with precious cargo, everything from textiles to grain. It would bring in a healthy cash payment all by itself. The ship was also worth plenty, seeing as it was less than 2 years old. Having been abandoned on the high seas, this allowed the Ellen Austin to claim it as salvage. In order to salvage this ship, the captain of the Ellen Austin sent some of his prize crew on board. A prize crew was a select group that could function on their own. It was like a mini crew, usually made up of the first or the second officer and a helmsman, along with men who could handle a ship with limited manpower. These were not just greenhorns told to go. The prize crew would receive a healthy portion of the salvage money. They had to know their stuff to be on this crew. You had to have enough experience to handle a ship under any conditions and any weather. The prize crew were usually some of the best sailors on board a ship. The captain of the Ellen Austin ordered the prize crew to man the Rosalie and make way for New York. The two vessels would sail in tandem. A fog blew in, and the two vessels separated so as to not collide in the dark. They sat out the night, waiting for the sun to burn off the mist. As the sun came up, the captain called over to his prize crew that it was time to get under way. There was no response. He tried hailing them, only to be met with silence. With an uneasy feeling, a second boarding party was sent over. A search of the entire ship was conducted, but the entire prize crew were gone. It was as if they had all jumped overboard in the dead of night. Now the story gets weird. Well, it gets weirder. A second prize crew was put together. This time the men had to be encouraged to go. More money had to be offered. Threats were made. All that merchandise below decks, as well as the money to be made from the ship itself. The sound of getting rich outweighed the fears, and the second prize crew went over to take control of this mystery ship. En route to New York once more, the two ships were making good time, right up until a minor storm came up. Nothing the two ships couldn't handle. They went forward with visions of a huge paycheck. As the Ellen Austin broke loose of the storm, the Rosalie was nowhere to be seen. The captain figured they'd been separated in the wind and the waves. He ordered the Ellen Austin to sail back and forth looking for the missing ship. It was never found. The captain of the Ellen Austin was forced to continue on to New York, missing over half of his crew. I searched everywhere for more on this story. It sounded so much like the Mary Celeste, only in a different part of the ocean. Some folks immediately yelled bunk, this never happened. For every naysayer, there were several positive reports. The Rosalie vanished in the Sargasso Sea, as well as the Bermuda Triangle. It was in the part of the ocean where the two overlapped. One of the explanations of the Bermuda Triangle disappearance is something called electronic fog. This current term came into being after Bruce Gernon managed to fly out of the Bermuda Triangle along with his dad and a friend of theirs. While Bruce was flying his classic Bonanza aircraft in 1970, an elliptical cloud began to form ahead of them at about 3 miles off the Andros Island. Before he could maneuver to avoid the cloud, it engulfed their plane. As they flew through what looked like fog instead of cloud, a tunnel began to form around them. They flew through this tunnel-shaped fog at 10,000 feet. The fog or cloud around them formed lines in it slowly began rotating and spiraling in a counterclock direction, as it seemed to be propelling them forward. The men in the plane began feeling as if they were in zero gravity, weightless. All the navigational equipment went haywire. There was some kind of electronic interference. Without any indication they were about to escape from this tunnel, the plane suddenly emerged over Miami. Bruce got on the radio and called the control tower. The operator said the plane had just simply appeared on their screen. After the three men were safely on the ground, they discovered all their watches were 30 minutes behind. They had arrived 30 minutes sooner than the trip should have taken, and they still had fuel left that should have been used during the flight. Bruce Gernon came to the conclusion that the plane and its passengers had slipped through some kind of a time tunnel. Canadian scientist John Hutchison has been able to recreate this weird phenomena using the electronic equipment he has in his lab. His lab also just happens to be his apartment. John has demonstrated how, by using magnetic fields of varying wavelengths, he can manifest a gray cloud or fog surrounding his test objects. John said, "I have personally experienced this grayish-type mist when I was doing my high-voltage research, and this mist would appear and disappear. To look at it, it looked like it was metallic. I couldn't see through it. I know that it existed." John Hutchison believes there might be a link, as in a black hole, that runs from the Bermuda Triangle and connects to the Dragon's Triangle, which lies south of Japan. If you look at a map, you'll see the Bermuda Triangle and the Dragon's Triangle are on the same latitude. Reports from the Bermuda Triangle say that a fog will appear around a ship or a plane, and then it seems to move along with the vessel, as if it's attached to it somehow. Soon, all the electronic systems and instruments start to malfunction. None of the instruments work, which can lead to confusion. On occasion, the effects can cause the crew to have imbalance issues. They become disoriented or dizzy. If the situation gets too bad, the ship or plane might crash, disintegrate, or simply vanish. It seems every time somebody comes up with an answer as to what's going on in the triangle, it never lasts past the first few close looks. Until scientists realize there is something going on there that warrants a closer examination, we may never get to the bottom of it. Now, I did write a book one time about the Bermuda Triangle, and it was called The Triangle. The story is fiction. I did do a lot of research before writing so I could interject situations and vessels that had actually disappeared. The story goes, during World War II, a German merchant raider is en route to the Florida Straits. As they pass through the Bermuda Triangle, things start to go bad. Over half the crew vanishes. Parts of the ship become brittle and fall apart. And as the crew try to find their way out of this place, they begin encountering groups of people, one of which just happens to be a bunch of Avenger bombers who are all taken on board the ship. I threw in all kinds of imaginative things. If you'd be interested, you can check it out at Amazon.com. Just look for Triangle by Chris James. You can contact me if you'd like at strangethings@arcanasa.com, or you can listen to the archives by going to strangethings.podomatic.com. Hope you enjoyed the show, and tune in next Saturday for the next installment of Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.